It's our way of sportsman. It's Lamont. We are back with another podcast episode, and today we got a special episode for you guys. I really wanted to do a reaction to this video because it stemmed from a topic that we like to discuss in many of our lives, especially when we have people discussing the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s. And I think when I heard this particular take right here, I wanted to share it with you guys because I think Draymond Green hit on some points that really kind of expose some of the narratives that people like to push in regards to basketball in the 80s and 90s. And that's what we have been doing here at FY of Sports. It's about dispelling a lot of the myths in some of these eras where they're mostly highlight driven. There's not as much footage circulating around that really people can digest. As we see today, people can take these games, break them down, digest and dissect every portion of the game and play. I don't think it was being done to this degree that we see what's going on today. And so there are a lot of people who like to push narratives about some of these older eras that aren't necessarily true, and they're simply based on nostalgia and they're based on myths. These myths are put out there to exaggerate or accentuate some of the, I guess they want to glorify those eras so they can keep a lot of those players ranked higher than some of the guys that we see today. Before we get started with the video, make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell if you haven't done so already. We're going to get to this footage. I want you guys to really hear what Draymond Green has to say. We're going to stop it and start it. We really want to dissect some of the things that he's saying. But I want you guys, as this video plays, I want you guys, let me know whether it's in the chat, whether it's in the live premiere chat, however you let us know. I want you to let us know if this is true to a certain degree. We're going to go ahead and get to this breakdown because I think he had a really interesting take on some of the sentiments from people like Stephen A. Smith or some of these older talking heads. I think he really did a good job of breaking it down, putting some context to some of the things that they say and kind of exposing the myths that we generally hear about these eras. Let's go ahead and get to Draymond Green's statements.
Or whatever you want to call when basketball was so much more physical, is some of the guys that be talking weren't the guys that was punching people. Like they act like, guys was just walking around the court like I'm hitting this guy in the nose. There were a few guys back then that would lay you out, that would knock you out, that would foul you and get thrown out the game. Bill Laimbeer, Rick Mahorn. But everybody running around acting like they were that. Y'all were getting bullied. And so it baffles me when every guy, just because they played in the 80s, just because they played in the 90s, is like, man, if you played in our day, you get knocked out.
Look, and yeah, we have these debates. So many people try to say that. They like to allude to this particular era of basketball as soft. They say these guys aren't physical, yada, yada, yada. And I'm thinking to myself, playing basketball my whole life, when you think back to even the playgrounds, the gyms, high school, whatever level you played, generally, the only time I'm seeing hard fouls or unsportsmanlike conduct happen is when a player is struggling to some degree, especially defending another player. If you have a guy, you can't keep him in front of you, you're reaching out, grabbing, you're knocking him out the air so he don't get easy layups. If you can defend these guys, for example, like Michael Jordan in the late 80s or when he came into the league, if they could defend him, if they can stay in front of him, if they were able to block all of his shots, there would absolutely be no need to knock him to the ground and foul him. They would just allow him to miss shots. They will collect the rebound and go the other way. As simple as that. I mean, when you look to a guy like Craig Hodges, when Craig Hodges on that Chicago Bull team, when he drove to the basket, were players knocking him out the air, hard fouling him? Or were they saying, oh, this guy's not a threat, we can stop him, so we're going to use our defensive prowess to get the stop so we can keep the game moving, so we can continue pushing the ball and the momentum our way? But hard fouls are generally predicated to poor defenders who can't stay in front of their man. So I think it's a very disingenuous take when people even use this to kind of claim that this era of basketball is soft, because it simply exposes that your particular era was filled with a bunch of guys that couldn't defend, especially defend athletes like with the likes of a Michael Jordan. And when we talk about athleticism in this league today, I mean, Jordan was athletic, but in the league today, we have literally a lot of players who come into this league just as athletic, if not more athletic than Michael Jordan. When Michael Jordan brought that type of athleticism to the league, it was so new that nobody really understood how to guard it. We're going to go ahead and get back to the rest of this video. There's a little bit more. I want you guys to hear everything that Draymond has to say on this topic.
No, not really, because it wouldn't be you. So, okay, you saying Rick Mahorn would have knocked me out. Rick Mahorn probably knocks you out. Like, Bill Laimbeer probably lays you out. So were there enforcers of that time? Of course. Would they have knocked you out? Of course. Their fine was also $2. Like, you know, it's just not the same day and age. If I go knock somebody out, I probably get fined $1 million. Like, it just don't work the same. And so, you know, when guys get to making these comparisons or talking about, oh, if you played in this day and age, like, yeah. And if you played in this day and age, you would have had to be way more skilled than you were.
And there we have it right there. Draymond Green take, I mean, against people like Stephen A. Smith, who consistently like to allude to the era that we see right now, the era of basketball that we're playing through right now. People like to make the contention or the arguments that it's not physical, that it's soft. And that's very odd, because when we watch at least the last 4 teams remaining in the NBA playoffs, when you talk about a Miami Heat team, a very physical defense, when you talk about this Boston Celtic team, a lot of people were alluding to the physicality that they would bring to the Warriors. And we saw how they used that physicality against teams, let's say, like the Brooklyn Nets, where many Brooklyn Nets fans and many people across basketball were saying, oh, they're being too physical. Right? When you look to some of these teams that use physicality to a certain degree to defend, they're just not out there hacking and fouling people. They're actually using defensive prowess along with that physicality to be great. You don't have to knock people out the air to show that you mean business in basketball. That actually slows the game down. It doesn't do you any justice, right? And it also shows the other team that you cannot defend, especially when people are attacking you. So that level of or that lack of discipline that these 80s and 90s fans like to allude to with regards to the hard fouls, it to me doesn't do you any justice with regards to trying to explain to us or even the youth of the day about the defense that was played in that era. Now, as Draymond Green also spoke on, the fines were much different. So players could be a bit more reckless without the fear of being ejected, right? Which multiple ejections now or technical fouls now can lead to additional suspensions. We know Draymond Green right now is 3 technicals away from a suspension. So he has to even be mindful of that in this particular day and age. Does that make him soft because he has to be mindful of that? Or does it make him smart? When we look at the fines now are much more absorbent. That means players cannot get away with doing these things on the court without facing significant financial penalty. And we know that there are some players on these teams. When, you know, a few years ago, we saw a player on a Cavs roster. I think it was Dante Jones, who was making the bare minimum. He ends up getting a technical foul, and he gets fined more than what his playoff check would possibly be. These fines now are so absorbent for players getting texts, for players fighting, because it's a bad look, it's a bad optic for a TV. It's just simply not financially worth it. So for these players to make the financial decision, the business decision to say, look, I'm just going to get better defensively as opposed to hacking and fouling. I'm just going to do things in accordance to the rules that are here in place, as opposed to making this game look bad by putting on a boxing match when we're supposed to be playing basketball. I guess this is something you have to think about. But again, when we have these discussions, look, we're going to go live. This is something that you can talk about if you want to, if you want to try to defend it, or if you wanted to try to defend the 80s and 90s and some of the sentiments that people claim about the physicality. Again, I don't believe that hard fouls is good physical defense. Hard fouls compromises your team's ability to win. It only puts the other team at the free throw line. And then it's also an indication, if I'm able just to foul you and send you to the free throw line, well, that probably can also mean that you don't believe that the other team can make free throws. So that's another skill that you struggle with. And as Draymond Green, when he ended his diatribe, what did he end it by? He says, well, you guys would definitely have to be more skilled to play in this era. And that's also something that when people bring up, the number one argument that you hear these 80s and 90s fans say, well, if we had the same technology, we would learn how to do these things as well. And again, it's not that. It's not that. If you are going to be a highly skilled player in any era, Larry Bird was highly skilled. He didn't need advancements in technology to be highly skilled. James Worthy was a highly skilled player. He didn't need advancements in technology to be highly skilled. Same with Dr. J. Same with Moses Malone. There were plenty of highly skilled players in the 80s and 90s who did not need advancements in technology to be skilled. I think it just needs to be understood that when you're talking about the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then even going into the 90s, you're just dealing with the era. You're just dealing with eras of basketball where players were still developing into what we see today. And now you have high schoolers doing some of the things that we saw NBA players doing in the 80s and the 90s. And now it's commonplace in basketball. Now the game is simply advancing and growing. And I think it's just time that some of the 80s and 90s fans simply come to terms with that. As many of these players, as we've stated before, like the Steph Currys, the Draymonds, as their careers start to come to an end, you might as well just come to terms with the fact that these guys will ultimately be replacing some of your favorite players as some of the top players of all time. And you need to spend less time simply trying to downgrade or denigrate what they've done for the game. Just give appreciation and then place them where they rightfully belong among the greats, even if it means allowing them to catapult some of your favorite players from the 80s and 90s. I think it's time that you guys just simply come to terms with that, because the hate is not a good look. The hate is starting to become easily debunked, right? You're left with really no facts, data, analytics, anything to back up the things you say. And obviously with us having access to some of the videos, the full games, we can literally go back and watch. We can also clearly see that these games in the 80s and 90s were not full of people just knocking you out the air every time you drove. That's just definitely wasn't going on in the 80s and 90s. Did it happen every now and then between two rival teams where there was contention and beefs? Yes, but that just was not commonplace among the game back then. So again, that's just another myth, another lie that they like to try to use to allure your minds and trick you into believing that these eras of basketball were just that much more difficult, or the game was just that much harder to play, when it just simply is not the truth. But you guys, let me know in the comments what you think about Draymond Green's take. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What are your thoughts on the 80s and 90s? And then when we talk about Stephen A. Smith alluding to this era of basketball being soft as far as the rules go, and that these players are getting a free pass because in other eras they would be just getting fouled and hacked and they wouldn't be able to drive so easily. Do you think people are just using these arguments to hold on to the past nostalgia of the 80s and 90s? Or is there some truth to the things that they're saying? But as FYF Sports, man, it's been another great podcast episode. Make sure you guys tune in to the live stream tonight. We will definitely be going live for tonight's game, Game 5 of the NBA Finals, where we can see another great game. Either way it goes, the Golden State Warriors, who have tied the series up in Game 4, are looking to take the series lead at home in Golden State in Game 5. It's going to be must-see basketball, so make sure you're here with us on FYF Sports for the NBA watch party to follow along with that game. But again, as I said before, it's FYF Sports, another great podcast episode. We will be back with more sports and news. But until then, it's FYF Sports, and we out.